Section 21 of The Diary of a Russian Lady. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Diary of a Russian Lady by Barbara Doukhovsky. Moscow continued. The director of the Foundling Hospital invited us to visit this interesting establishment, one of the largest in the world, founded by the Empress Catherine II. That huge asylum takes charge yearly of 14,000 babes. Many rows of cradles fill up the vast halls. About 50 little ones are brought here every day. The wet nurses, chosen with the greatest care, carry them away to their villages afterwards, and continue to take care of them until they are grown up. These women receive 3 rubles per month for each child, who, on attaining the age of 20, remains as workman in the family that has given him shelter. We saw a respectable matron who had been serving in the Foundling Hospital for 40 years, and whose sole duty is to give the newly arrived babes their first bath. The poor little things will never see their mothers again, for as soon as they are washed they are carried away to be mixed with thousands of other babies. A terrible crime has just been committed at St. Petersburg. On the 1st of March, our beloved Emperor Alexander II was murdered by the anarchists. This noblest of men has been killed by a bomb in the streets whilst returning from a visit to the Duchess of Oldenburg. That day we went to a concert given by Marcella Sembrich, the celebrated opera singer. In the middle of the performance, an officer came up to say that the Governor-General of Moscow, Prince Dolgoruki, wished to see my husband at once. Something serious must have happened. Otherwise, the prince would not have disturbed Sergei, who promised to be back soon. But I returned home immediately and would not go to bed before Sergei's return. I became very anxious at his prolonged absence and couldn't imagine what was keeping him so long. 11 o'clock arrived, and he had not yet returned. I could not help being very much alarmed, and as the minutes passed, I listened more and more anxiously for the sound of hoofs on the pavement, but still there was no sign of my husband. It was long past midnight when he came home in a great state of excitement, bringing the awful news of the murder of our Tsar. A bomb had been flung at his carriage, the back of which was torn away. His Majesty, luckily, was not hurt, but 2 Cossacks of his escort and a boy who was passing in the street at that moment were severely injured. The Tsar insisted upon seeing the wounded and approached the victims, when a second bomb was flung at him, which tore off one of his legs and shattered the other. General Grosser, the prefect of the police, who always accompanied the emperor wherever he went, had him lifted up into his sledge and transported His Majesty in that desperate state to the Winter Palace, where he passed away some minutes after. The tragic death of Alexander II filled the world with horror. The inhabitants of Moscow were thrilled by the news of that terrible event. The streets were black with people in mourning. The bells in all the churches are tolling all day long. The murderers of our Tsar were caught and brought to trial. They were all sentenced to death. The sole executioner existing in Russia had been sent for from Moscow to execute them. Sophia Perovsky, the daughter of a high Russian functionary who had participated in the conspiracy plot, fled to Switzerland and for some time eluded her pursuer, a political spy who had been sent to trace her. The detective craftfully succeeded in making her fall in love with him and follow him to the frontier, where she was arrested and brought for trial to St. Petersburg. Not a very handsome proceeding on his part, I must say. When Sophia Perovsky appeared before the tribunal, she was told that she would be hanged if she did not denounce all her accomplices. But she absolutely refused to divulge their names, and exclaimed with splendid indifference, "I do not dread your gibbet. I only dread the misfortunes which befall my beloved brethren." However, when the choice was given to her to be hanged or delivered over to the mercy of her beloved brethren, she threw herself at the attorney's feet, imploring him to condemn her to the crudest punishment, but only not to give her up to the mob. We are living through very troublesome times. Our new emperor, Alexander III, receives anonymous letters with threats that he too will be murdered, and his son, the heir to the throne, stolen and taken away. A secret notice was given to the police that the anarchists were preparing to blow up the Winter Palace, which is looking now like a fortress encircled with a rope. Even generals are not permitted to enter its enclosure. It is an awful time altogether. Alarming rumors continue to circulate. There is said to be a great deal of agitation in the country, especially in the south, where there is a special hatred against the Jews. Their houses are ransacked and plundered. The peasants begin to rebel and refuse to take oath to their new czar, stating that his father's murderers had been bribed by the Russian nobility, which was now avenging itself for the emancipation of the peasants, affected by Alexander II. Troops were obliged to be sent there to settle order amongst the rebels. Kobzev, one of the most important anarchists, a very stylish young man who hadn't at all the dynamite look on his face, gained admittance under a false name into the most fashionable drawing rooms of St. Petersburg. He went afterwards to Moscow and even forced his way into Prince Dolgoruki's palace on pretext that he was an engineer who had found out a new system of gaslight for the town. The police had been informed that a quantity of dynamite has just been transported to one of Moscow's railway stations. But when they wanted to confiscate it, the cunning anarchists, disguised as policemen, took possession in full daylight of the murderous baggage under the very nose of the real police agents who arrived at the station a few minutes later and found all the dynamite gone. The irritation against the anarchists is growing from day to day. There are often scuffles in the streets. A masculine-looking girl with short hair and glasses was taken for a socialist by the wild mob, which stamped upon her, reducing her nearly to the condition of a pancake. She had to be sent to the hospital with a bloody nose and black eyes. About the same time, a French manicurist bought a paper from a newsboy, in which the emperor's funeral was described. Finding that the vendor had charged too high a price for his paper, the Frenchman asked him, in very bad Russian, why he took so dear for such stuff, meaning the sheet of paper, but unfortunately he was understood in quite a different manner, and knocked down and beaten so severely that he died the next day. In the middle of June, the Tsar came to Moscow to review the troops on the Kudinka field. A warning had come from abroad telling the police to take great care of bomb throwers during that review, and especially to mistrust the men wearing top hats, which could hold engines of destruction in them. Though great precautions had been taken, I felt awfully nervous whilst the review was going on. Count Brevin opened the parade on horseback, surrounded by my husband and a brilliant staff of splendidly uniformed officers who took up their position behind the emperor. My fear of the anarchists did not hinder me from admiring the beautiful appearance of our soldiers. The artillery and infantry in compact rows, and the cavalry galloping very fast, produced an imposing spectacle. The regiments were splendid. They all came up and passed, cavalry, infantry, artillery, ambulance, doctors, and all, with much music. The regiments were splendid. They all came up and passed, cavalry, infantry, artillery, ambulance, doctors, and all, with much music. After the review, the emperor invited the chief commanders to a lunch at Petrovsky Palace. Some of the officers of the emperor's suite came to pay us a visit in the afternoon, General Skobelev a brilliant celebrity amongst them. Though he was supposed to be a woman-hater, he gallantly kissed my hand, at which an enthusiastic lady visitor, who happened to be present, began to examine my hand to see if a star had not encrusted itself on it after the kiss of such a man, every inch a hero. A week afterwards the Grand Duke Michael arrived to be present at the grand maneuvers. I was on the Kodinka field driving my pair of ponies when the order was given to the cavalry to attack the Petrovsky Palace. Fearing to be trampled down by the charge of the cavalry, I jumped out of the pony chaise, leaving the ponies to the care of the groom, and started running home by the shortest cut, jumping over pits and ditches. The next day I drove to the spot where the mock battle was to take place. The sound of the trumpets resounded from everywhere, and the cannons kept up such a continual firing that the ground actually shook under us. The cavalry was prancing round. I soon perceived the Grand Duke, and would have turned tail and fled, but I was not permitted to make my escape. I alighted and tried to hide myself behind my ponies, but for the first time I was dissatisfied with the diminutive stature of these little fellows. There was no concealment even for a rabbit. My position was awfully critical. I have never felt such a longing to sink into the earth and disappear from human sight. The Grand Duke, who had discovered me, laughed a great deal. I didn't. We often spent our evenings at the Hermitage, a large music hall, the entrance of which was strictly forbidden to collegians and cadets. One of them got in nevertheless, dressed in women's clothes, a fair, effeminate youth. With his smooth, girlish face, he easily passed for what he pretended to be, and played his part to perfection. He was soon surrounded by a crowd of admirers, but the poor boy got severely punished for his trick, and had to endure 3 days of arrest. By the end of September we returned to town. Our new home was ready to welcome us. Our home is said to be haunted, and the first thing we did was to order a Te Deum to be sung in our apartments. Now I hope we won't come across visitants from the other world. We have been very busy settling into our new quarters. When all was arranged, we began to lead a gay life and went to the best concerts and theatricals of the season. Sarah Bernhardt, an actress of world-wide renown, the greatest tragedian of the age, having conquered New York, achieved her next success in Moscow, which she took by storm. I was deeply interested to see her in La Dame aux Camélias, where she is at her best. Sarah, who is already well up in years, is a delicate-looking woman with a waist of painful slenderness. Her acting is simply wonderful. She was a glorious incarnation of Violetta in the death scene, though I am not readily moved to the tears I wiped from my eyes, una furtiva lagrime, as Donizetti's song has it. The audience, which packed the house from floor to ceiling, was enthusiastic and applauded her much. Sarah's name was on everybody's lips. The best milliners and dressmakers of Moscow went to her performances to copy her costumes, and the confectioners promised her portrait for every pound of bonbons. At our at-home days, when I found myself searching for a suitable topic of conversation, the name of the great artist came to my aid, and I had every reason to be grateful to her without her being aware of it, for having helped me to entertain my guests. In comparison with Sarah, the rest of her troupe was very insignificant. The actor performing the leading part of lover, a gentleman by birth, had fallen under the spell of the enchantress and lost his heart to her. For her sake he became an actor and always accompanied her on her tours, following her wherever she went like the traditional lamb. The lovesick Jeune Primère looked extremely foolish when making love to Sarah on the stage, casting sheep's eyes at her. My goodness, what ridiculous creatures men are! Anthony Rubinstein, the king of the piano, was giving his last public concert in Moscow. The whole town came in to be present at the leave-taking. When the great pianist appeared on the estrade, He was met by a roar of applause. The wild enthusiasm of the house was indescribable. Rubinstein was a real treat and bewildered me by his marvelous execution. This incomparable artist gave an interpretation of Chopin which sent a thrill through me. His touche and his technique were wonderful and perfect. He made the instrument positively sob and sing. I was in an ecstasy of delight and listened entranced, having never heard anything so beautiful before. Rubinstein looked something like Beethoven, clean-shaven, with a powerful face. His long locks, shaggy and picturesque, waved in sympathy with his excitement. When he had ceased, there was a moment of entire silence, that finest homage due to beautiful playing. During Rubinstein's stay in Moscow, he was bothered by a crowd of artists in embryo, who all wanted to sing for opera, without having the remotest idea how to sing, coming to ask him if he would try their voices and tell them if they had talent enough to follow the artistic career. A friend of ours happened to come on a visit to Rubinstein just at the moment when a fat, necklaced lady of about 50 summers was making her rehearsal. She sang like an old cat. Her one idea was to be heard, and she howled all her top notes so hard as to make all the dogs bark in the street. Dumbfounded and horrified, our friend stopped his ears and took to his heels, running away as fast as his legs could carry him. One day we went to see a bird exhibition at the Menage and were present at a horrible cockfight, a most disgusting sight. White and red cocks were taken out of their narrow cages and settled on a small estrade covered with sand and surrounded by a railing. The combat began. The winged champions struck against one another, with bristled feathers which flew about on all sides, croaking piercingly all the time. By refinement of cruelty, they had steel spurs fastened on their legs. The enraged birds picked off each other's skins by morsels, and long streams of blood spread on the sand. The white cock soon became purple-colored. His red antagonist, after having plucked out both his eyes, won the battle. I was boiling all over with indignation, but the cruel audience exhausted itself in frantic applause, admiring this miserable sport. The ganders' fight was not a less sickening spectacle. The males with wings outspread prepared to battle, but only in the presence of their better halves, who ran after their pachas gabbling loudly. I regretted still more to have accepted an invitation to be present at a wolf hunting on the race ground. The poor animals were brought on the arena in big wooden boxes, exposed to the light of day, and scared by the crowds of noisy spectators. The unfortunate wolves had scarcely the time to make 2 or 3 limping steps, both their hind legs being tied fast together, when a pack of starving hounds rushed upon them and tore them to pieces. It was a shame, a crying shame. Oh, how barbarous mankind is, I thought. The terrorists are continuing their work. It's getting positively dreadful. Everyone's nerves are set on edge. Many rumors are circulating in St. Petersburg. The story goes now that the late Tsar Alexander II proceeds slowly every night from the Winter Palace to the Kazan Cathedral, where he appears to the people. One of the chief rioters profited by this report, and one evening, during Vespers, the Emperor's ghost made its usual appearance, pronouncing in a loud voice the following words: "Warn my son that I am waiting for him." But hardly had the admirably disguised sham emperor finished his public address when the police laid hands upon him. Moscow is now the rallying place of the anarchists. A band of malefactors had just been caught setting themselves upon undermining one of the theaters which was being built in the enclosure of the future French exhibition on the Kodinka field, a few paces from the Imperial Pavilion, which will be inaugurated in the month of May. By a lucky chance, a factory where imitation oranges stuffed with dynamite were being made was also discovered. The terrorists, disguised as errand boys, were to throw this murderous fruit into the midst of assemblages in order to produce a panic. I am greatly alarmed by all this. Towards the beginning of May, in consequence of a sudden burst of hot weather, we left the town and betook ourselves to Petrovsky Palace. The French exhibition was just opposite the palace. It was a grand affair. Lots of people were flocking in to see the splendid show. Punctually at 10 o'clock in the morning, we heard the whistle announcing the opening of the exhibition. Every time I visited it, I felt myself as if transported by magic from Moscow to Paris. All the sections are very interesting and instructive. My cousin, Prince Leon Galitzin, one of the richest winemakers in the Crimea, had a splendid stand where he regaled everybody gratis with his wines. I dreaded to pass close by, because my cousin always forced me to taste the different sorts of wines, which made my cheeks, already burning like fire because of the great heat, pass gradually from red to crimson, and it was most unbecoming. I had some accidental meetings with old friends at the exhibition. One day, in the whirl of the crowd, I found myself suddenly face to face with Mr. O, my old love, for whom I had had a strong liking in my girlhood days. It was an age since I had heard anything of him, and he was the last person I ever expected to see there. I had quite rubbed him out of my mind, and there he was now. I could scarcely believe my eyes. My heart gave a little jump, and I don't mind confessing I was rather pleased to see him, although I thought I had long since given him up forever. The sight of Mr. O gave me an odd mixture of sensation. I was startled, I was disturbed, I was pleased. Time had made but few changes in his appearance. He had grown a trifle stouter, that was all, and I recognized him immediately. For the first moment agitation deprived us both of speech. On overcoming his constraint, Mr. O began to talk of different things. He chaffed and laughed and told funny stories as of yore. Presently we discovered a comfortable seat and sat down near where the band was playing. Suddenly Mr. O became serious and began assuring me of his love, of his fidelity. Oh, the things he said to me! I wanted to put a stop to his passionate outburst, and felt very angry with my paralyzed tongue. All the same, I could not remain entirely unmoved, and to my extreme disgust I felt myself turning very red, and for the sake of doing something I began drawing circles with my umbrella on the sand, looking anywhere but into his face. When recovering my composure, I felt it my duty to lead the conversation into other channels, and though my color was beyond my control, my voice was steady, and with eyes which still declined to meet his, I told him he should leave off talking such nonsense, doing my best to make light of the matter. But he gazed at my downcast countenance and said, "I love you, Vava," to my very face, as if he had the right to call me by my Christian name. When we got up and passed through the section of toys, he asked abruptly if I had any children, and without waiting for my reply, he disappeared and returned soon after, holding a small india-rubber monkey by a long string. He thrust this little horror into my hand, whispering, "That's for your baby." As it appeared, Mr. O, who had married soon after me, had neither any babies of his own, and thus this nasty little monkey was of no good to either of us. In September, the Grand Duke Nicholas came to witness the grand maneuvers and stopped at Petrovsky Palace. He lived in one of the wings of the palace and wanted to see the Grand Duke's arrival. I had to mount a narrow corkscrew staircase, with shattered steps leading up one of the turrets. The walls were moldy and hung with cobwebs which tumbled down upon my head. The view of Moscow and its surroundings on reaching the top of the turret was a thorough compensation for my disagreeable climb. The next day I was invited to a dancing party given in honor of the Grand Duke at the Military Summer Club on the Kodinka field. The Grand Duke was very affable towards me, and contrived to put me at my ease at once. His Highness asked me to take tea with him. He seemed in capital spirits, and talked in the most friendly way. He told me that he remembered me when I was quite a little thing and wore socks and pinafore, and said that passing through the town of Kharkov he came to visit my parents and made me jump upon his knee. He sat round the tea table for a long time. In bidding goodbye, the Grand Duke proposed to me to come on the maneuver ground the following morning. Getting up at break of day, I hurried to our rendezvous and saw the Grand Duke in the distance standing upon a hillock amongst a group of generals and officers surveying the sham fight with a field glass at his eye. On perceiving me, the Grand Duke nodded and waved his hand, and when I approached His Highness, he inquired after the state of my health, fearing I had taken a cold in remaining out in the club garden so long the night before. A few days later, a sham alarm was raised in the camp. I was out before 5 o'clock in the morning and directed my steps towards the camp half asleep and yawning widely. There was still moonlight outside, and the breeze that ran before daybreak was making me shiver a little. Suddenly, cannon shots were heard, and in less than 2 minutes the whole camp was astir. The soldiers rushed out of their tents and arranged themselves in battle columns, whilst trumpet signals rent the air. No sooner had the Grand Duke Nicholas departed than his brother the Grand Duke Michael arrived to inspect the artillery. During his stay, the artillery officers gave a lunch at the military club. I was invited to it, but was about to refuse, being very unwilling to go there alone, as Sergei was not quite well. But there was no escaping from it, and I had to accept the invitation. Countess Brevern, the wife of the commander-in-chief, who was also going with her 2 daughters to that lunch, offered to take me under her wing. When I was being presented to the Grand Duke, he did not recognize me at first, and taking me for one of the young countesses, he asked their mother which number I was. "Your Highness does not recognize me," I exclaimed indignantly. When the Countess named me, the Grand Duke pressed my hand warmly and said that I looked so absurdly young that there was nothing surprising at all that he did not recognize in me such a respectable person as the wife of the Chief of the Staff. Lunch passed off gaily, and I was glad after all that I went to it. The Grand Duke was charming to me and not at all ceremonious. I soon felt quite at my ease with him and entirely free from shyness. Altogether, I enjoyed myself thoroughly. Although I had been dragged there by force and considered myself a victim, feeling like a lamb about to be led to slaughter, and compared that lunch to a disagreeable pill which had to be swallowed. In November, Sergei had to go to St. Petersburg and took me with him. Whilst there, I had the chance to be present at a banquet given in the hall of the Assembly on the day of the Jubilee of the Academy of the General Staff. With difficulty I got a place in the gallery, from where I could see very well. As I was ascending the stairs, someone called me by my name. I looked round and saw the Grand Duke Michael hastening up to me. Putting out a welcoming hand, His Highness exclaimed, "You can't say now that I did not recognize you, and it will atone for my former mistake, I hope." To which I answered that the Grand Duke would only be completely forgiven when I receive his photograph from him. The very next day he sent me his portrait with his autograph. Spring came with galloping speed. The date of the coronation was fixed for the 15th May. I went to see the court regalias exposed to view in the Kremlin Palace. The crown and the scepter, studded with precious stones as big as nuts, amazed me by their incredible richness. On the walls hung Gobelin tapestries and pictures taken from the Bible. Just opposite the metropolitan's seat, I saw a painting illustrating the story of Potiphar's wife dragging Joseph by his legendary mantle. These heroes of the Ancient Testament being very lightly clad, the police censor had found it necessary to dress them in a more decent manner for the coronation, leaving at the same time, just next to that picture, a large canvas representing a group of the happy just, enjoying paradise in a completely nude state. I also went to see a fine assortment of state carriages and the beautiful horses which were to drag them, pure white Hanoverians, all of them. In Moscow, wonderful preparations have been made in the way of decorations. Our capital is in a state of extraordinary excitement. Triumphal arches and large tribunes are built on the principal squares. A great number of houses have their fronts decorated with carpets and flowers. Our old capital is crowded to its utmost. People come from all parts of the world to see the ceremony of crowning. Every place in the trains was booked weeks in advance. The troops of the Guard regiments continue to arrive from St. Petersburg. Along the streets move cavalry and guns. At our entrance door a placard says, "Staff of all the troops quartered in Moscow during the coronation festivals." My husband's eldest brother has arrived to be present at the coronation. He had to take part in the equestrian procession of the Russian nobility. I went to see the rehearsal of it, and nearly choked with laughter at the sight of the timorous expression painted on the faces of some of these brave knights, who sat on their horses all of a huddle and were wrapped up in observation of their own movements. The nobility certainly did not shine in the saddle. My brother-in-law's neighbor, a stout and rosy country gentleman, clutched at his horse's mane and asked him anxiously if his horse would not bite his heels, and confessed that he did not at all feel safe, being quite out of practice now, not having been for some 20 years on horseback. The Emperor arrived at Moscow on the 8th May and drove straight to Petrovsky Palace. There is much to be dreaded during the coronation festivities, for the anarchists are not slumbering, and agents of the secret police had to be placed on the whole way. The triumphal entry of the Tsar into the town of Moscow took place 2 days afterwards. A great crowd had assembled in the streets through which the procession was to proceed to see the Emperor's entry. I and my sister-in-law had the privilege of being given good places on one of the tribunes built on the square, just opposite the Kremlin. It was at the risk of our limbs and lives that we got there, being nearly crushed to death. We found ourselves in a dense crowd and marched boldly through the throng, our dresses leaving a good deal of themselves behind. We ventured within the rope drawn to keep back the crowd, and nearly reached our places when a new encumbrance arose. A row of soldiers refused to let us pass, but their chief took pity on us and cut our way through his men. At last we got inside the Kremlin with a deep sigh of relief. We had to wait for the procession from early morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The day was gray. The sky looked threatening. It was undoubtedly going to pour soon, and we risked being drenched as our tribune was uncovered and our umbrellas had been taken away from us at the entrance. But I was not made of sugar or salt, and preferred to have my dress ruined and to be drenched to the bone rather than be deprived of the beautiful sight which awaited us. To crown all, I was awfully hungry, not having had time to breakfast before starting, and it had been strictly forbidden to bring anything in one's pockets for fear of concealed explosions blowing everyone up. A lady sitting next to me had a squabble with a policeman through an inoffensive orange, which she had taken out of her pocket. She was not allowed to eat it even in his presence. Outside the rope there was an indescribable squeeze. The crowd swayed with a wave-like motion and made a rush besieging the barrier. The human waves were kept back by several lines of soldiers and a double row of policemen. Such a crowd was almost beyond imagination. At 2 o'clock precisely the guns began to fire and the bells to ring a full peal, announcing that the Tsar had left Petrovsky Palace and was on his way to the Kremlin. Soon the procession appeared in sight, and the crowd began to acclaim their sovereign by loud cheers. All the heads were bare. As I am a creature of strong emotions, I, too, screamed to make myself hoarse. The procession advanced in the following order. First came a golden coach drawn by a team of splendid white horses, in which sat the Empress and the Grand Duchesses. The Emperor rode behind with the Tsarevich at his side, on a lovely pony. The Grand Dukes and the officers of the Guard regiments brought up the rear. The spectacle was most imposing. For 3 days the heralds in heraldic costumes rode about the town announcing by sound of trumpet that the ceremony of the coronation would take place on the 15th May. The great day arrived. Long before 6 o'clock in the morning, the streets were black with excited crowds. I rose when it was only beginning to be daylight, and at 7 o'clock we were already driving to the Kremlin. It was printed on our tickets that after 8 o'clock nobody would be allowed to enter its enclosure, and that was the reason we had to start so early. The large square was covered all over with red cloth. Ministers of the state and officers in full uniform began to assemble. The tribune on the opposite side was occupied by foreign royalties and representatives of the different Oriental countries in gala costumes studded all over with precious stones. The Khan of Khiva was glittering like the sun. The Grand Duke Waldemar, accompanied by a numerous suite, came out of the palace and proceeded to the Cathedral of Assumption, where the Tsars are crowned, followed by all the members of the imperial family, the ladies of the court wearing the national dress of the richest style, the court officials resplendent in their gorgeous uniforms, the ambassadors of foreign countries with their spouses, the personages of the first 2 classes, and all the authorities of the town with my husband amongst them. The bewildering variety of the many different uniforms, both military and diplomatic, was striking. Our troops standing in long rows with the standard of every regiment were an imposing sight. The Metropolitan, with a mitre on his head, in magnificent vestments, thick with gold embroideries, followed by his archbishops, came out of the cathedral to meet their majesties, who were slowly descending the steps of the wide marble staircase of the palace, coming out of the private apartments to proceed to the cathedral. The Tsar gave his arm to the Tsarin, whose train was carried by 4 pages. Behind came a long file of ladies-in-waiting and maids of honor. A company of the regiment of the Chevalier Guards walked ahead. Behind them came 48 pages, and a second platoon of Chevalier Guards brought up the rear. The day was gray and wet. It soon began to rain, but it was indeed remarkable that in the moment their majesties appeared, the heavy clouds broke away, and out burst sunshine, whilst a flock of white doves circled around them. At the foot of the staircase 16 generals, aides-de-camp to the emperor, supported a magnificent baldachin under which their majesties passed on to the cathedral to be crowned, whilst guns were repeatedly firing. At the end of the ceremony there was a clamor of joy bells, and the military bands began to play our national anthem. It was a thrilling moment, and my excitement was intense. That evening Moscow was beautifully illuminated. The belfries of the numerous cathedrals and the towers of the Kremlin glittered with different colored lights. From all parts gushed out fountains illuminated by Bengal lights. I felt myself transported into dreamland. The following days were a whirl of festivities. There were many entertainments given to which I was bidden, but it was difficult to get me to go anywhere. At the risk of being treated as a vandal, I had arranged my existence nicely without going outside to look for amusement. I hate balls now, finding that dancing without a bit of flirtation is only a ridiculous jumping about, and loving my husband as I do, I am not the woman to be flirted with. I was told that the Grand Duke Michael repeatedly alluded to my absence at the court balls. He hinted to Sergei that he was a Bluebeard and kept me under lock and key inside a tower, like a tyrant knight of the Middle Ages. Mrs. Grundy is ever on the warpath, and people won't let me alone for having cut myself from the world. I wonder why they take so much interest in me when I do not take the faintest interest in them. I do not care a fig for anyone, having the courage of my own acts and opinions, and care only to please my husband. It is difficult to understand me at times. I am not quite like other people, being a thing of nerves and moods. One evening, when my sister-in-law had driven away to a court ball, I felt myself somewhat like Cinderella, and as I couldn't stand being left altogether out in the cold, I seized the opportunity for a few frantic tears in private. I dare say it was silly of me, but I couldn't help it. Only fancy, my sister-in-law is going to enjoy herself, whilst I must pine away at home. But the odd thing was that even if I had been persuaded ever so much to go to that ball, I should not have gone. A great festivity was given on the Kondinka field for the people. On both sides of the imperial pavilion large tribunes were built for the higher dignitaries of our town and the guests, and just opposite an immense stage was set up for the mob. I sat surrounded by all the great ones of the earth. As soon as their majesties appeared, surrounded by a glittering court, the performances in the different shows broke off and hurrahs were heard from all sides, whilst hats and bonnets flew up in the air. After the patriotic enthusiasm got appeased, an allegorical cavalcade in fancy dress defiled before us, after which baskets full of fruit and sweets were dealt out to the populace. We had to dine in a restaurant in the park, all our servants having a holiday that day. The town council organized a banquet for 3,000 soldiers belonging to the Preobrazhensky Guard regiment within a few miles of Moscow, in a village bearing the name of that regiment. Our emperor was present at the festival. He walked round the refreshment table set up near the imperial pavilion, and lifting up his glass, His Majesty drank to the health of his soldiers, who threw up their caps in the air and shouted with all their might. Many crowned heads had come to Moscow to see the coronation, Prince Amadei d'Aosta amongst them. He is said to have the evil eye, and as I am somewhat superstitious, I provided myself with a gettatore, a tiny coral hand with 2 extended fingers. This prince has already brought many misfortunes during his life with him. One day the part of the tribune on which he stood smashed and fell. Another time a part of the ship on which he was sailing was blown up. By that time much of the excitement had calmed down, and Moscow relapsed into its former quiet. At the end of May, our troops began to leave Moscow. The regiment of the Chevalier Guards, with their band marching in front of them, defiled before our windows on their way to the railway station. At this sight, without knowing why, I burst into tears like a silly that I was. I suppose it was due to the state of my nerves, irritated by the unusual mode of life I was leading during the coronation. A great number of rewards have been distributed on account of the coronation. My husband, having already got all the rewards due to the rank of Major General, received as a present from the Tsar a rich gold snuff-box set all over with big diamonds, a custom dating from the times of the Empress Catherine II. September came, bringing in premature cold weather. The rain fell continually. These showers had their good side in laying the phenomenal dust in the streets of our venerable old city. End of section 21. Read by Gila Freeberg. Napa, August 20th, 2024.